Ukraine says its troops are making headway as the country launches a new counteroffensive against Russia in the Kherson region. Meanwhile, UN inspectors are in Ukraine to assess conditions at Europe's largest nuclear plant. That facility is in Russian-controlled territory, and recent shelling in the area has sparked concerns. Debora Patta is following this story for us from Kyiv.
More than half a year of Russian occupation has turned the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant into a military base that runs along an explosive front line, with both sides trading accusations of shelling in the area. Kyiv blamed Russia for hitting the nearby village of Energodar, while Russia claims a Ukrainian missile strike punched this giant hole in a fuel depot at the site. A chilling warning that the fighting could cause a disastrous meltdown from Ukrainian presidential advisor Serhiy Lyshenko.
It's international terrorism, nuclear terrorism, what Russia is doing in Zaporizhzhia. This nuclear power station is the biggest in Europe, and in case of catastrophe, it's going to be 6 times more than in Chernobyl.
The UN inspection is set to start tomorrow, but it comes amid an intense battle to liberate occupied Kherson further south. Emboldened by the steady supply of Western military aid, Ukraine is holding nothing back.
Artillery.
They're hitting us with everything they've got. Tanks, aviation, artillery, shouts this Russian soldier. The much talked up counteroffensive has intensified. Kherson was the first major city to fall in the early days of the war. For more than 6 months, residents say they've been living in fear under their Russian occupiers, accusing them of kidnap and torture.
And this is the first time that atomic energy inspectors will be investigating a nuclear plant occupied during an ongoing war. They will assess damages at the Russian-controlled site, as well as evaluate security concerns and conditions under which Ukrainian technicians are working. Anne-Marie, Errol?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about this inspection, and you sort of touched on it. Do we know, are they going to have sort of unrestricted access? Are they going to be able to talk to these Ukrainians who are essentially being held hostage at the plant, running it? Will they be able to stay as long as they want to inspect the place thoroughly?
It's a good question, Anne-Marie. I mean, it could take a fair amount of time, and we don't know at this stage what kind of access they will have. Negotiations have been ongoing for some time now to get this organized, so one would assume that the fact that the inspectors are now here and on their way to Zaporizhzhia, they came to Kyiv first, is part of the negotiation process, and that has been ironed out. But anything could happen once they're actually at the plant. Ukraine wants those inspectors to set up a permanent base there, essentially to take control of what has become a very, very dangerous situation. And it could take a few days to complete this initial assessment. We understand that some of the inspectors will remain there until the weekend, but some nuclear experts say that given the fact that the fighting has raged on for over 6 months, it could take weeks to repair the damage. And remember, the Atomic Energy Body usually focuses on monitoring countries' use of enriched uranium. But this is a war, and it's the first time they're working in a situation that is engaged in a conflict with the kind of widespread nuclear infrastructure that exists in Ukraine.
And Deborah, it is such a serious situation right now. When you and I spoke on Saturday on the CBS Weekend News, you made the point that 6 months in, there's no end in sight to this war, and there are actually Russian trucks and tanks in and around the facility itself. Just underscore for us why it is so dangerous to have this conflict literally inside a nuclear plant.
Exactly. I mean, in short, very, very, very dangerous. We spoke to Ukraine's energy minister, and he said that if there was an accident, it would be 6 times worse than Chernobyl. 6 times worse. Because remember, this is Europe's biggest nuclear power plant. And the minister also told us that he's very worried because last week, those fears were intensified when the power plant briefly lost power due to damaged electricity supply lines from a fire at a nearby coal power station. Remember that the plant needs a constant electricity supply to cool down spent nuclear fuel. It lost that connection on the grid last week and then moved on to backup diesel generators. Now, if the backup goes, It's been likened to flying a plane with only one engine. So if that backup goes, the minister said they have around 90 minutes before a chain reaction which will start a nuclear meltdown. This would be a catastrophe, not just for Ukraine, for Russia and for Europe. You're at the mercy then of the winds, which would determine which way a radioactive cloud would blow. So this is a very worrying thing, and the plant was on backup generator for over 24 hours last week. And remember, as you pointed out earlier, Anne-Marie, that it's controlled by Russia but operated by Ukrainian technicians. There are reports that they're operating under extreme duress, even possible reports of torture and abuse. This is not an ideal situation for people operating a nuclear plant. It just raises the possibility of human error.
It really does. Listen, before we let you go, I got to ask you about Ukraine's counteroffensive in the southern part of the country. Both Ukraine and Russia are characterizing the results of that counteroffensive very differently. So what do we know for sure?
We never know anything for sure when there's war, and of course both sides are going to, push their line. Ukraine has been talking up an offensive in the south for some time now. Really, it has intensified from their side in the past few days. You can see the Ukrainians, as it were, gaining confidence as Western military aid continues to arrive, including massive assistance from the U.S. They're targeting Russian supply lines, and we saw that. Those U.S. rocket launchers, they say, known as HIMARS, have been very useful for them in this regard. They want to take back Kherson, which was seized by Russia very early on in the war and was held for over 6 months, is still being held by them, and they're really pushing hard in that area. They want to cut off Russia from its supply chain coming through annexed Crimea. It would be a huge loss for Russia, so they're going to give it everything they want. The Ukrainians are going to also put up this massive fight. It's a tough battle. And that's why the Ukrainians say the weapons that they receive are crucial. We also understand from a U.S. official who told CBS News that Iran has been supplying Russia with drones, but that the first shipment of those drones experienced several technical failures.
Interesting, Deborah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Deborah.